we have quite an exciting change of pace. We have Dave Greenberg, who's the Chief Executive of Eve, a company that prevents the loneliness and isolation of hearing loss using the power of data to change how people hear at work. And he's going to be joined by Sandra Winters, who's the Clinical Director and Organisational Wellbeing, working on behalf of Costain Skanska JV. Before I talk to them live, we have a short video, and then they will be joining me live in the room.
In 1974, September the 2nd, I was given a bag of cotton wool balls, and they were my ear defenders. I suppose that's part of the reason I'm 3 parts deaf. But I can't hear conversations. And you're talking to me, you are now screaming at me, and I'm going, "Pod, I can't hear." You know, it's like the grandkids scream at me, "Grandad, turn the telly down."
The #1 occupational disease by volume is occupational deafness. And yet, would you have guessed that? It accounts for more than double all of the other occupational diseases combined. With the eFocus Lite, it has something called hear-through technology, which actually allows people to hear through the ear defender while still being protected. The difference between passive and active ear defenders is that with passive, you can't actually hear the environment. With active, you can still hear what's going on around you. It's incredibly common on site to see people removing a passive ear defender in order to communicate. So as soon as you have something like hear-through technology on an active ear defender, you can remove the need to do that. So when people are trying to have a conversation on a construction site with traditional passive ear defenders, they'll basically have to remove them to actually be able to hear the environment so that they can communicate. The challenge there is that they're also going to be exposed to noise. With the data that you get from the peak mapping software, you can actually work to eliminate hazards because you'll know exactly where they are.
What we've found sometimes is an activity we didn't consider to be noisy, but as we've got the live data from the noise mapping, we've identified it's a high hazard for noise. We've then gone away, thought about how we can change it, looking at the hierarchical protection.
It's been a super advantage to actually see the data on the day that the exposures occurred and to actually see what that actual potential impact is and to really look at what those risks are.
So when you're comparing the price of the Eve solution to traditional methods of noise control and hearing protection, we've actually priced it so low that it is cheaper than a pair of foam earplugs. And the way we've done that is the mission of the company is to eliminate the isolation and loneliness caused by hearing loss, which means that the last thing we'd want to do is charge for the protection. So we actually supply the ear defenders, the Focuslight, for free. And what we charge for is a subscription to the visualization and the analytics on the Peak platform. The client owns all the data, and we just charge £1 per day for each person to actually see the data.
And I can now invite Dave to join us. Dave, if you could turn on your microphone and your camera, please. And same for Sandra, and join me on the stage. Thank you very much. Welcome to you both, and thank you for joining us for this live discussion. Dave, could you please describe a summary of the abstract to begin?
Yes, so I might be having connection issues, but hopefully you can still hear me.
Yes.
So the project ran over 12 months. It was in collaboration with Costain Skanska joint venture as part of HS2 at the Euston Enabling Works. And that was where Sandra really took on the role of leading it from the client side. And it was a process of doing the training and installation of the system so that people could actually understand where is noise, who is being exposed, and why they're being exposed, so that then the occupational hygienists and the health and safety managers could work to eliminate hazard at source or substitute or go through the various other aspects of the hierarchy.
And Sandra, what was the outcome? What were the results of the project?
Okay, so I suppose really it was summarised there in that video that you've just shown. Really the results were that we saw that the approaches that we traditionally take within the industry and the assumptions that we'd classically made in the protection that we were affording the individuals was wrong, ineffective, and that actually this gave us the opportunity to really examine that and to understand how we needed to change. And that resulted in many changes, which I'm sure we'll go into in further questions, but it led us to setting a new mandate, a standard in noise, and has also led us to look at behavioural aspects to monitoring and to exposure, not just the metric of the measurement itself, but looking at the wider human factors, which we gained a lot from in terms of results from the project.
Excellent. So how does the system complement the current approach to noise management and hearing conservation? Sandra, if you would like to start.
Okay, so probably touched on it there really. It's sort of that allied professionals approach really into how we all play a role in looking at the multiple factors that make up hazardous exposure and then subsequently the protection that's allocated or that's afforded. So I think it complements the way that we view, the way that we consider different angles. And certainly from a hygienist point of view, and for myself working alongside the hygienist, myself and the safety teams, it's been fantastic to be able to use this technology to look at how we can all explore what advantages we can get from it, because we may have traditionally had a slightly narrow approach to what we were going to gain from, say, a set of data. And what I have been really impressed with is how much more we can use the data for, not just the actual measurement of noise per se.
Mm-hmm. Dave, would you like to add anything to that about how the system complements the current approach?
Yeah, for me, it's about thinking of continuous improvement. And typically, we might do a risk assessment at the beginning of a project and establish what our control measures are going to be. And then, for those that we can't do anything for, we'll issue PPE or hearing protection in this case. And what we're doing there is providing data so that you can continue to revisit the top of the hierarchy of controls. So it's one thing in a fixed manufacturing facility, but it's something completely different when you have a construction site that day to day is totally different. So having that, it's not feasible to do continuous monitoring with any other traditional method, but if it is there passively in the headset itself and it's going through to a cloud-based platform that you can then access and visualize the data and run reports from, you can then, when you want to prioritize noise control or elimination of a hazard or substitution and so on, you have the data to do so.
Absolutely. So how do you manage the calibration of the devices?
So they come factory calibrated. There's 4 microphones on each headset, and each one can be calibrated so that it is as sensitive as a Type 2 noise level meter. But for me, the really key thing is that you're getting continuous monitoring, which is just not feasible with any other type. And of course, you can at any point compare those measurements in the field with your Type 1, and we're very confident that the measurements are very, very accurate.
Great. And Sandra, what recommendations would you make for delegates listening to this? What have you learned from this?
I think what we've learned from this and what I think is important to share is that how we can learn across the professions, how we can learn to actually use this data to set out how we're going to continuously monitor. And as David said there, in how we can actually use that data and work together to explore what we can achieve.
Yeah. And David, what do you reckon this could mean for UK construction and other industries, for example?
I mean, we're already seeing the standard rising. So, we've set a new benchmark, which is passive hearing protection is really not doing a lot of good for most people. All of the data that you can collect on how well it fits is not that great. That's if it's worn at all. Of course, most people don't want to wear their passive hearing protection correctly so that they can hear. So by saying, the only option really is active as a baseline. And from there, you also need to know, is a person wearing it correctly? How much are they being exposed to at any given time? And what can you then do about that? It raises the standard. So it's very difficult to justify passive hearing protection or guessing what level of protection a person is getting when there is an alternative that is far more cost effective.
And you mentioned that occupational deafness is the largest occupational disease. So how are you leading the improvement of the standards?
So we're speaking to a lot of different people simultaneously, some of them on this call at the moment. But really, we know that it has to be driven by the industry, by industry leaders, decision makers saying, I understand it, I can justify it, I'm going to make the change, learn through the experience, and then they will implement their own local policies. And I do believe that eventually, 2005 regulations and the various monitoring requirements, and also what is reasonably practicable will change. It doesn't make any sense that what we said in 2005 that was reasonably practicable is the same thing as today. We didn't really have the Internet of Things, connected devices, the ability to have small wearables that can collect data and so on and actually analyze that. So what is reasonably practicable today is totally different. So we're demonstrating that. We're having people actually use it and lead the way. We're just providing the technology. And some of the sort of the thought leadership and saying, well, can we do this a different way? And people are taking that on board. And I think then the regulations will follow. And so all ships rise on the rising tide.
It sounds very similar to what Andre was talking about earlier. And so what are the long-term wider implications of NIHL?
Well, we're actually talking about that this morning. So for me, one of the key ones is that the recent links being explored with dementia. When we talk about aging populations, an aging society having to work longer, it's going to be a real burden on the working population if there is a sort of a top-heavy population which are not able to work. And so it's down to us today to, that's why I personally love the occupational health space, because we can prevent disease in the first place. We can keep people healthier and happier for longer. And, there's a lot of impacts from noise-induced hearing loss, not just the hearing loss ones and tinnitus, but when you have that reduction in stimulation of the brain and atrophy of grey matter, you have cognitive decline. HS2 is an amazing example of a project that has within its sort of mandate the legacy aspect. It's going to be running for 20 years. We're going to be people starting now at a certain age with a baseline who, it is not going to be a good thing if they're retiring and not able to, or retiring early. As a result of their work, and there's absolutely no need for it. We just need to know what the risks are, and the only way we can do that is with sensors and data at the moment.
Absolutely. Well, we've had quite a few questions in the chat box, which I will put to you now. David Tyler's asking, what's the battery life of the devices and what's the range of the data collection from them during operation?
12 hours battery life, charges up in 2 to 3 hours, and the range, it's all running on Bluetooth. So you have hubs around the site which are transferring the data, but the headsets do all of the processing. And then you have gateway devices and edge devices, if you're a bit familiar with the Internet of Things lingo. So the headset is an edge device, collects the data, transfers it to the gateway, which then transfers it to the internet.
Excellent. And Hiparth Mehta is asking, in an NRR for these kinds of ear protections, is there any standard to compare?
So EN352, am I still sounding okay?
You've gone a little bit gremlin-y, yeah, but we can hopefully still hear you.
Okay, I can hear that as well. But EN352, there is a standard for active hearing protection. There's no standard for the built-in noise monitoring, however, so we are working with various organizations to set new standards on what that could look like. But the NRR, we don't have an NRR number, we have an SNR number, which is 29 dB. It's slightly lower for the helmet mounted, a few dB lower. But the key thing is you actually know what level of protection is being received. So rather than having an assumed protection value, which is what the SNR really is, you can say, well, that's you may never get more protection than that, but actually you can know what a person is getting. Because we know most people get between 0 and 5 dB of protection with a typical insertion of an earplug. So it might be rated for 30 dB SNR, but doesn't mean anything.
Well, you've just answered Lee Heffernan's question. He was asking for the SNR. So thank you for anticipating that. Well, that's been really, really interesting. So unless you have any final remarks, maybe Sandra or Dave, then we can close this conversation. Do you have anything further to add, Sandra?
I think I'd just add that it's just been a fantastic opportunity, and one where the journey's just beginning with the use of this technology, and how we as collective professionals can really take this forward, and to look at all ways by which we can use this and use the data to actually shape change for the workforce for the future and the health of that workforce. So for me, I think I just put a call out to action to all of my colleagues to say, come and join us, ask more questions, and let's see how we can all drive this forward.
Great line to end on. Thank you, Sandra. And Dave, do you have anything to add before we close?
No, I can't top that.
Well, thank you both for joining us. I can now invite you to turn off your microphones and your cameras.
Fantastic. Thank you.